Hey guys, my name is Sharad. I'm the host of the Recently podcast, bringing you another very special guest on this call, Rylee Knox. Rylee, welcome to the Recently podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, Sharad, Rylee Knox. I'm doing well. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Let's get started. Let's tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are joining in from, what kind of real estate investing do you do, and how long you've been investing for.
Sure. I'm in Central Maine, and I am primarily a multifamily buy and hold real estate investor, kind of at the core. We fix and flip, wholesale, and I'm a real estate agent as well. So that's kind of that's the active side of my income, but the long-term passive strategy is a buy and hold multifamily.
Yeah, you have a lot going on. Are you buying these properties in Central Maine area?
Yeah, most all of our assets are in Central Maine, with the exception of a couple assets in Southern Maine, and we just purchased our first short-term rental in the Smokies.
Okay, great. Congratulations. How did you get started? Tell us a little bit about that. How long have you been investing for?
We've been investing since 2017, and we actually got started accidentally. My wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, was just looking for her next place to live and looking for an affordable option. And she stumbled on kind of let's buy a duplex as an affordable option. So I started looking for multifamily homes and ended up finding a 3 unit. And then when we got married, I moved into that 3 unit and started managing the tenants. And that is kind of where the light bulb went off and the passion for real estate investing began.
Are you doing full time now? Are you investing full time?
Yeah, I'm a full-time investor, agent, flipper. So I'm
Okay.
full-time in the real estate industry.
And what were you doing before you kind of got caught by the real estate bug?
Yeah, so I was actually I was a W-2 nuclear test engineer for the Department of Defense. So
Oh,
that's what
wow.
I was doing for
Yeah,
work. I enjoyed that season of my life, but I would not go back to that. I've loved being in the real estate industry.
absolutely. So you bought that 3 unit, and what happened after that? Like, how did you go about, hey, I want to buy more of these multi-units? When you're buying it for yourself, it's a totally different process and experience versus when you're buying specifically as an investment property, correct?
For sure. So we started out without much money. So we house hacked our first couple. So that property in 2017, my wife bought with an FHA loan, and then I bought another 4 unit in 2019 on an owner-occupied multifamily, and that was quite literally just from saving pennies at our day job. And then 2019 is the year I left my W-2 employment and became a full-time real estate agent. And in 2020, we bought 3 or 4 multifamily assets. And from then on out, it was kind of traditional 20% down bank loans for the most part. So 3 or 4 acquisitions in 2020, 3 or 4 acquisitions in 2021, all small multifamily, 3 to 5 units. And then in 2022 is when we really started marketing for off-market deals using some creative financing strategies to kind of make our available down payment funds stretch a lot farther.
So the multi-units that you're buying, are they all like 3 to 5 unit, or have you looked into like bigger apartment complexes, or you've looked into some single family also?
Yeah, our largest property owned by my wife and I independently is a 16 unit that's in
Okay.
Thomaston, Maine, and we use some creative financing on that deal. And then I'm a general partner in a 12-unit syndication in Berwick, Maine, which is a southern Maine town, and we are actually pretty close to the finish line on a 49-unit acquisition that I'll be that's a three-way partnership with myself and 2 other partners.
Nice. Congratulations. How are you finding these deals?
Yeah, so I would say in the very beginning, it was MLS. I just scoured the MLS. But basically in 2022, so I'm an investor-friendly real estate agent. I primarily specialize in investment properties and primarily multifamily assets. And I was really successful at finding my clients properties that the math worked out on the MLS up until late 2021, early 2022. And then I just stopped being able to consistently find properties that penciled out in a way that was attractive to my clients and myself. So in 2022, we started working with a group called Backyard Home Buyers who works off the Resimply platform and sending a large amount of direct mail marketing and kind of building out that funnel and process. So since 2022, almost all of my acquisitions have come from off-market deals.
So you're sending letters and postcards to
Yep,
these.
sending letters and postcards and then working it's not that hard to send the mail. Sending the mail is kind of the easy part. It is the sales process that follows when those warm leads come in, calling them, nurturing, getting the information, and working them down the funnel to acquisition.
And then you're trying to do creative finance now, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah,
that's
we've taken opportunities, right? So the nice thing about off-market sellers is instead of having one property, one seller, and 15 buyers and kind of getting a little cutthroat, usually it's one seller and one buyer. Usually we're the only buyer at the table, or one of two or three. And what it allows us to do really, when you have real estate agents involved in the transaction, in order for the seller to talk to the buyer, like the seller has to talk to the seller's agent, who has to talk to the buyer's agent, has to talk to the buyer. There's this big game of telephone, and sometimes it can feel like we're on opposite sides of the negotiating table, and in a way that we are. But what I have found is when we are working with off-market sellers, we can really get on the same side of the negotiating table and just say, hey, Sherrod, what are you looking to sell? What are you looking to accomplish? What's your pain point? And what do you need to get out of this deal? And then we usually focus on those pain points, try to solve those problems, and then work in alternative solutions that are also helpful to us. So usually the way that plays out is a seller who wants to get rid of an asset. Maybe they have some sort of a capital gains issue. So we can usually do one of a couple of things. Sometimes if they'll carry a second position seller finance or even a first position seller finance, that will allow us to get into a deal with less money down, will allow them to kind of spread out their capital gains burden over a number of years. The other thing that we'll do usually is, we'll close on their date of choice, right? So sometimes we'll negotiate a deal and then they'll want not 4 or 5 months to close because they're going to execute on a 1031 exchange. So for us, we tend to focus on the two things that are pretty important to us, which is purchase price and down payment funds, how much capital we're going to have to allocate to the deal. And we try to give the sellers everything else that they want. So when those opportunities arise, we take advantage of seller finance opportunities and use those to stretch our dollars a little further.
with the high interest rate right now, what are you noticing with multifamily investors? Is there higher motivation, lower motivations, or like people are just kind of waiting on the sideline to see the direction interest rate is going to go in?
That is a really great question. In our market, so Central Maine, I have seen little to no slowdown, if any, in the
Okay.
residential multifamily space. So 2 to 4 units, people are still buying those like crazy. Multiple offers. For many people, it's when they get priced out of the single family home market, they start looking at those duplexes and triplexes as alternative, really affordable housing options. In the larger multifamily space, so 5 to 50 units, which is primarily where I operate, I have seen a slowdown, a lot more hesitancy from buyers, a lot deeper due diligence being conducted on properties that do go under contract, more retrading. Sellers are more willing to work with buyers when things come up during due diligence that 18 months ago would have probably just got swept under the rug and the transaction would have moved forward. We are seeing some retrades and just the buyer having a little bit more weight to throw around in those transactions.
Yeah. And are you noticing more because it's a challenge with residential market where there's a lack of inventory. Is that what you're noticing on the bigger 5 to 50 unit properties, or is that starting to like just open up a little bit now?
I'm starting to see more inventory. We're still historically low, but starting to see a little bit more inventory and properties just sit on the market a little bit longer,
Yeah.
long enough for the sellers to get a little bit nervous and maybe realistic. You know, one of the major differences I've seen is 18 to 24 months ago, a lot of properties were trading based off NOI projections, right? Future NOI projections.
Right.
And in general, that's like not that great of a practice, right? You want to buy properties based on today's NOI, and then any increase in the NOI you want to be rewarded for
Agreed.
as
Yeah.
the acquirer of the asset. And 18 to 24 months ago, we just were seeing properties kind of trade up to their full potential, regardless of where today's NOI was. And right now, the pulse on the market is buyers are really scrutinizing today's NOI, and they
Okay.
are not willing to pay a premium for opportunity or potential NOI growth in the future. They're
Interesting.
really honing in and fixating on the current NOI of the assets.
Yeah. That's
I think
really
some of that
interesting.
comes from rent stabilization as well.
Yeah.
Definitely seen less rent growth in the last 9 months than we had in the 18 months prior to that.
Interesting. I mean, like similar to like the 5 to 50 unit, those apartment complex. So I've started noticing in our market, like where locally I live in the San Diego area, there's like more, it's still low, but there's still houses are sitting on the market for a little bit longer. And then there's more inventory available. I don't know if that's what your experience been also on the residential side, but at least it's interesting. The neighborhood that I live in, there weren't any houses for sale for like 6 months, and they were, selling pretty quickly. Now there's like four houses on the market. They've been on the market for like 2, 3, 4 weeks now, some of them. And you're like, okay, maybe the market is starting to change just a little bit. So it's interesting to notice that the same thing is happening in like the bigger apartment complexes.
I agree. It seems to me that it's starting to get a little bit more balanced in our market. Part of my business is home flipping as well. And where we used to see 24 months ago, we would list a property and have 20 to 30 people through the property in 7 days and probably receive close to 10 offers. The last several dispositions that we have done on fix and flip single family homes, we've received one or two offers, and they've had contingencies, and they've just been a little bit more balanced. The buyer seller dynamic has
Yeah.
been just a little bit more balanced.
One question I want to ask you, since you're in a very interesting situation where you're an investor, you're doing a couple of different things, you're also an agent, with the whole National Association of Realtors, this whole
Hmm.
thing that happened with sellers should not pay for buyers' agents. And it's supposed to take effect next month, July or something. I'm not very aware of kind of, informed with what's going on. Any thoughts on kind of how that's going to change the market on the retail side and more importantly on the investor side?
Yeah, what I've seen around that and kind of my instinct, my take on the whole thing is that the 80/20 principle applies to real estate agents. Realistically, 20% of the licensed agents are doing about 80% of the volume. Those top tier agents are already having conversations with their buyers about compensation, and they have been
Okay.
for years. I have always charged a certain compensation to my buyers. So when we sit down in buyer consultation, we talk about how I get compensated, what that compensation is, and that a portion of that compensation could come from potentially the seller or the listing agency, and that a portion of that compensation could need to come from the buyer directly. And I think that top tier agents have been doing that for a long period of time. They've never really allowed the listing agent to dictate how much they would get paid. So I think it's sort of an issue for the other 80% of agents who don't have a consistent book of business and are really relying on those listing cooperation commissions to pay them. I think that buyers will always recognize value. So if you are a real estate agent that's working with a buyer and you're bringing real value to that buyer, you're educating them, you're taking the time to understand their needs, you're bringing them on and off market opportunities that work well for them, you're negotiating well, you're providing excellent service. I think that those buyers, in my experience, those buyers have always been happy to work to make sure that their agent gets compensated fairly.
It's
Uh,
interesting. Like you're the first agent that I've talked to where they're already getting compensated by the buyer. If you don't mind, like I'll be very interested
sure.
here. Kind of what does that compensation structure look like? And then are you getting any pushback from buyers, some buyers, or all buyers are like, yeah, I mean, it sounds fair that we'll be willing to compensate you.
Sure, that's a great question. And I want to stay away from specific percentages
Of
because I think
course,
that's kind of
yeah.
the basis of the lawsuit. That there's really not supposed to be, whenever you'll hear people say, this listing percentage is the norm. I always try to correct that and say there is no norm. There's not allowed to be a norm. There's no standard. That's really the word that we try to avoid is standard. This is, yes, to answer your question, I have received pushback in the past. I'll present to a buyer and I'll say, hey, the buyer agency commission is X. In an ideal world, we will be able to collect the entirety of the buyer agency commission from the listing agent, but that may not be the case. And if that's not the case, we're going to have a conversation about that ahead of time while preparing the offer. So you will know when you prepare the offer how much of the buyer agency commission is going to be paid by the listing agent and how much you'll be responsible for. So you can factor that into your offer. And whenever you sign these buyer representation agreements, right? And I describe the buyer representation agreement as a two-way agreement, right? It's my agreement to provide all of these services, which I take very seriously. Because if you sign that agreement, you're kind of on the hook to provide those services. So if there's a competitive offer situation going on, right, and a property is listed on a Thursday, and there's an offer deadline on Saturday, and you've got a wedding Friday night, and your client wants to get in and see that property, you signed a buyer representation agreement. You've got to work to find them a solution to get them in a position to be competitive. So I kind of describe this as a two-way agreement, right? They're offering you exclusivity in most cases, not in all cases. You don't have to sign an exclusive buyer representation agreement, and they're agreeing for you to be compensated. I have the benefit of having a large sphere of influence and a lot of past clients and a large book of business. So it is not the absolute end of the world to me if a buyer decides that what I have to offer is not what they want to pay for, right?
Right.
But when I've received pushback in the past, right? Because I would say like maybe 5% of the time, 10% of the time, I'll sit down for a buyer consultation with a buyer and I'll present my services, kind of the covenant, what I promise, what they promise, and I'll present my compensation structure. And every now and then they'll say, I don't want to do that. I don't want to commit to paying that 3%. And in some cases, the answer is I can't afford that. I don't have that
Ye-
money.
Yeah,
If
that
it,
was going to be my question, like follow-up question. Like that's where I see it being the biggest challenges. Like for like we flip houses in Indiana, right? Our ARV typically is 150, 175 to like maybe 250 is the price point we
mm,
stay at. And these are buyers, FHA buyers, and they need some help on the closing cost credit. How will these buyers be able to come up with money in addition to the down payment, other expenses that they have to also pay the agent? That's where it'll be very interesting to see like how all this unfolds. I mean, higher income, maybe it's a little bit different, where the
yeah, but
buyer
I
may
would
be able
say,
to
in
negotiate.
large part, I'm working in the same price point, kind of at or slightly below that median home price point. And we do run into it where they don't have an extra
Yeah.
1% or an extra 2% of the purchase price. That's two, four, $5,000. And in many cases, they were already tight on the down payment from the beginning. And what I offer in those cases is, hey, I'm only going to get paid if you purchase a property, right? So we are going to have to work together to solve this problem. And in many cases, that falls on the agent to make sure that the buyer has access to the best lenders with the best programs and kind of the best knowledge to be able to navigate these liquidity shortfalls among buyers, as well as going to the seller and presenting a really strong offer that includes some buyer concessions or some
Mm-hmm.
seller credits, right? So yeah, either closing cost credits or commission credits. And I think that that really kind of falls on our ability to negotiate and strengthen the offers in other ways, right? There's different ways to strengthen offers, and I think that we're just entering a season where, and it's always been the case that people with more money have an advantage
Right.
when making offers on homes, right? The cash buyer has always sort of had the most advantage, followed by the
Absolutely.
conventional buyer, followed by the FHA buyer. So certainly a buyer who doesn't have the funds to pay their agent is at a slight disadvantage. But that doesn't mean that we can't negotiate for that to
Yeah.
be paid by the seller.
Yeah, I've heard from some, people in the industry talk about that there may be some lenders willing to make it part of the loan where the commission gets paid out of the loan and it just gets, for the buyer, it just gets
I think
added to
that
the
that's
loan
coming.
balance. Yeah,
One
it
change that
has
we've
to,
already
right? Yeah.
seen is with VA loans. It has always been against the policy for VA loans. VA buyers are not able to pay their real estate agent additional funds that didn't come from the listing agency. That's the way that
Interesting.
it's
Yeah.
been for my entire
Right.
career. And that rule is changing, and the VA is now allowing buyers to pay their agent. So I think you're starting to see changes in the lending landscape that I think will all, quite frankly, line up pretty well with the timelines on the NAR settlement, and you'll probably see things change around pretty quickly in lending. Because at the end of the day, what I don't want to see happen is more unrepresented buyers.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's the solution, and that's my fear, is that there'll be more buyers without representation, and that's a concern of mine. I think that representation is important.
Yeah. And I think, do you see it as some buyers that are not serious will just stay on the sideline until they're actually serious because now you don't have this, barrier of, hey, I need to have a little bit of money in the game. And then some buyer's agent may start collecting a little bit of compensation, in order to even show the houses,
Yeah.
you know.
I think you'll start to see a lot of different compensation models
Yeah,
pop up. I mean, at least in our state, there's a place in the buyer representation agreement for a retainer fee.
right.
And a lot of agents don't charge a retainer fee because it's not widely accepted and
Yeah,
buyers aren't used to it. And if all the competition isn't doing it, sometimes it's tough to negotiate
exactly.
that in.
Yeah, then it puts
But I think
pressure
you'll
on
start to
you.
see things like retainer fees, even hourly wages. You may
Oh,
start to see that become more and more prevalent. You might start to see
yeah,
agents say, "Hey, I charge $100 a showing,"
interesting. Yeah,
or $70 an hour. And I think that the whole purpose of this thing, right, is to push the real estate industry away from anti-competitive behavior and towards a competitive, fluent marketplace. So I
yeah,
think having multiple types of compensation models available and multiple levels of service, right?
yeah,
Not all real estate agents and brokerages will provide the same services, right? Some will only list your property on the MLS. Some will do open houses. Some won't. Some will only
true.
show you property. So I think that having a suite of services and a suite of expense profiles for those services ultimately will lead to a healthier, more competitive marketplace.
Right. And even with that, there will still be some sellers that are or agents that are going to follow the traditional or how things have been done, right?
Yeah,
It's
just
not
to be
like I
really
just
clear, it is not that the legislation that is coming down does not discourage sellers from agreeing with their listing agent to compensate a
the
buyer's
buy.
agent.
Yeah.
What the rule is discouraging is for MLSs to require this,
Yeah.
which has been kind of a barrier to entry, right? You can have a real estate license. So in my case, a main real estate license. But in order to get MLS access, you have to join your local board of realtors, which is part of the National Association of Realtors. So there are things that are legal in the state that you're practicing real estate that are realistically not able to be practiced because NAR and local MLSs are kind of the gatekeepers, or have historically been kind of the gatekeepers to common practice.
Right.
And I think that one of the things that this lawsuit kind of targets is common practices for us to have
Yeah.
less industry cooperation, if you will, and some would call it collusion, and just more competitive behavior. They want more competitive behavior in the marketplace. And that really
Absolutely.
means you have to go to a more open model.
Yeah. No, I think it's going to be very interesting next 6 months to a year where people get used to this new compensation model and see how it impacts real
I do think
estate
you'll have
industry.
agents
And
quit. I think you'll have agents
yeah,
move on to
agreed.
other industries, but I also think you'll
Agreed.
start to see agents get really creative and
Yeah.
strengthen their value proposition,
Yeah.
which is a great thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Riley, this has been incredible. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing some information on this whole NAR thing. Yeah, I mean, I love like some of the creativity that's going to come out of it. It'll be interesting to see how that does. All right, we have a couple of other questions in the next
Sure.
segment of our podcast. What do you do for fun?
What do I do for fun? Well, I have a 3-year-old daughter.
Oh, cool!
Um,
Congratulations. Yeah,
and
I
a
have a
wife that
three-year-old
I
daughter too.
adore. Thank you. They bring so much joy to me. I am an explorer at heart, an adventurer. So climbing mountains,
Nice.
mountain biking, water sports, whitewater rafting. I like to be outside and in nature. So we rock climb and ice climb. My daughter does a lot of these things with
Oh
me.
yeah, that is
Um,
awesome. What's
my
her
wife
name?
as well. Her name is Aspen. My wife's name is Emily.
Aspen. Nice.
Yeah.
That's such a
She's
beautiful
named
name.
after the mountains. So
Yeah, yeah, I figured. Yeah, that's awesome, man. Congratulations. Yeah. What's the one book that's had the biggest impact on your life? It could be a business book, a personal book, or one of each.
I'll start with the Bible. Really has framed who I am and how I view the world. And a lot of my financial principles have
Mhm.
come from the Bible. When I first started my career, Scott Trench wrote a book called Set for Life. And there's
Right.
really one page in that book that has really impacted our trajectory. And that page has a graph, and it graphs kind of the net worth impacts over time of choosing to be a renter, choosing to be a homeowner, and choosing to be a house hacker. And that one page is really what caused us to choose house hacking as our first real estate strategy. And that's the book that I give away the most
That's
frequently.
amazing. That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah. Isn't it incredible that, you read a book, but there's like one line that you read or one page that you read that has such profound impact on your life. Yeah, incredible answer, man. Thank you. By the way, Bible is the number one answer so far on the podcast. Yeah. Uh,
It's a good
all right.
book.
Yeah, it is. It is. Final question. If you could spend a day with anyone, dead or alive, who would you want to spend the day with and why?
I my daughter's 3 and her name is Aspen. Before we had Aspen, we had a child that we miscarried. And we planned to name Denver. So if I could spend one day with anyone, it would be Denver. I would like to have met that child. We don't know the gender. It was earlier in the process, but that's who I'd like to spend a day with.
Yeah, sorry to hear about that, man. Yeah, but yeah, thank you for sharing that. All right, Riley, if someone who's listening to this podcast wants to connect with you and learn more about your journey, what's the best way for them to do that?
Probably Facebook. I'm Rylee
Okay,
Knox on Facebook. I'm also RyleeKnox.com. There's a contact me link in there, and I do respond to all my messages and emails. So that's the
perfect.
best place to find me.
Perfect. We'll put links to all of that in the show notes. Riley, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been absolutely incredible, especially going into this whole NAR, legislation. I think it's going to be very interesting. Thank you again, Riley. Thank you so much for being a guest on Recently podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet
Thanks
you.
so much.